I'm Greg Columbus, honored to be joined today by U.S. Marine Corps veteran Joe Rodgers, served in the Pacific Theater of World War II, and is a veteran also of the Battle of Iwo Jima. And sir, thank you very much for your time today.
Yes, you're very welcome. I'm happy to be here.
Where were you born and raised, sir?
I was born in Birmingham, Alabama in 1925.
And was there a history of service in your family?
Only outside my family. I was the only boy in my immediate family. I had three sisters that did not serve, and so I was the victim.
When did you join the service?
I joined in 1941, 1942, I should say, in February. That's when I was just about became of legal age. I was 16 at the time, and my father, I had to wait for my mother to die at the age of 44 after Pearl Harbor get my father to sign the papers for me that I was 17. So he had to lie a little bit too. But I did straighten that out after I got out of boot camp. I confessed that when I became legal age, I confessed to him that I lied to get in. So it worked out that I didn't suffer any damage from it.
Why was it important to you to serve so much that you would say that you were not the age that you actually were?
Well, of course, I was a deep depression kid. I was born in 1925, and the 30s weren't real good. And so I had a desire to better myself some way. And I always admired the Marine Corps, and so I wanted to get in if I could and when I could. But my mother had cancer, and she didn't die until 10 days after Pearl Harbor. So my father agreed to sign the papers that I was 17 then, and that gave me a first-class trip to San Diego, California.
Camp Pendleton?
No, I went to San Diego Marine Corps Base at the training center there.
And what did they train you for?
To kill people, mostly. And try to stay alive. And, of course, I couldn't predict either one of them until long after it happened, and I was still there. So,
did they designate you for infantry or some other?
At the time, they when I got off the rifle range and finished boot camp, I went to Pearl Harbor in a guard company there at Pearl Harbor. There was damage everywhere. All the ships of the fleet were in dry dock being repaired, and so I went to Marine Barracks there at Pearl Harbor in a guard company, and our mission was to guard all of those dry docks where the wreckage was being repaired. So that was my first trip overseas. And I was there until March when I got out of boot camp and went to Pearl Harbor. I was there for a year and a half and then came back to the States to join the 4th Marine Division at Camp Pendleton.
And so when did you get deployed after that?
When we got out of boot camp, we boarded ship and went there at Pearl Harbor for the guard duty. And when that was done, we stayed there until they actually formed the 4th Marine Division in February that year. And then because of where I was, I became part of the 4th Marine Division. That's when my war days started. They shipped us over, after the 4th Marine Division was formed, they shipped us over to the Marshall Islands at Kwajalein Atoll, and that was our first combat.
After all that training, what was it like to actually be in combat?
Well, it was strange because in our training, we went to Jack's Farm in San Diego and were trained in tanks. And when we finished the training at Jack's Farm, they told us we were going through it again. And they didn't tell us why. They just told us we were going through it again. And we thought we were kind of dumb that we didn't pass, but they didn't explain anything, and we went through it. After the second time, they told us we were going again, and then we really thought we were stupid because this would be the fourth time, and actually we wound up going through that tank school 5 different times, and without knowing why. But it became plain afterwards because when the 4th Marine Division was formed, we became Company D tanks, 4th Tank Battalion. They told us why we went through that school so many times. Our job was we were going to reconnoiter for tanks in the Pacific. And when we got to the Kwajalein Islands and they saw how flat it was, if you got in front of any tanks on the Marshall Islands, it was a death sentence because they'd shoot you. All they had to do, it was so flat, all they had to do was just overrun the island. So after Kwajalein, we landed at the entrance to the Kwajalein Atoll to guard the entrance to the lagoon because the ships were going to pass through that place and into the lagoon so they'd have access to all 17 islands there. And so we were there for 3 days, I think, until they got them into the lagoon. And then they put us aboard ship and sent us to Inuitak Atoll because we were going to get into some fighting there, we knew. And so we went to Inuitak Atoll, and they took all of our mechanized equipment away from us and gave us 10-man rubber boats. And our combat was going to consist of landing on islands in those rubber boats. So we went to a staging area to get off of the landing craft into the rubber boats. Unfortunately, the staging area was in an area where the tide was going out to sea. And so when we got ready to go into the island we were assigned to go on, we were about 13 islands away from where we should be because we were out in the middle of the sea. Our captain, Captain Katzenbach, was a very smart man, and he figured that out. So he found the 13th island, but it was the opposite end of the atoll where we were going to be. So we had to land on those 17 islands in the middle of the night and get to our assignment at the other end of the atoll before the invasion of the airstrip the next day. And there was a coral reef that ran from Engeby over to the island that we were assigned to. And our job was to set up machine guns there and prevent the landing of Marines, Japanese the next day, to keep any Marines from going across that coral reef. And so we sat there, and the battle started over at the airfield, and we had set up a 50 caliber machine gun across that coral. And we sat there all day, and guess what? They didn't come across there until the afternoon late. A Navy plane from the battleship dropped us a note. We saw him out there at the coral reef, but we didn't know what he was doing. He was dive bombing, but he would come up and then he'd dive bomb again. We couldn't see who he was dive bombing. But he saw us, so he came over and dropped us a note and told us there was a Japanese out there. And every time he would try to strafe him, Well, he would go under the water, and when he make his strafing run, well, the guy would come back up. So he couldn't get him because every time he was underwater when he would try to strafe him. So he said if we wanted to go out and get him, he would dip his wings to show us where he was. And so the first sergeant and 3 other guys and myself got in one of those rubber boats and rowed out there, and he would show us where he was. And when we would came in sight of him, the first sergeant would motion to him like that to come to us, and he would shake his head, said no. So that happened, and the first sergeant had a .44 that he carried on his left shoulder, on his left hip. And when that guy shook his head, he took that .44 out and fired around at the guy about 3 feet away. And he threw up his hands like this, and then we had motioned for him to come to the boat, and he shook his head. And so the first sergeant fired a little closer to him, and about the 4th time, he almost shot his ear off. And the guy started saying, okay, so he waited for us to go in. And he was practically naked. He didn't have anything but grenades. And so we finally got him in the boat and took him back. Fortunately, I had learned a little Japanese, and this guy was a Korean that was aboard a battleship and landed at Inuitak. And I learned from him, my limited knowledge of Japanese, that if he was traveling with the Navy, he became Navy. If he was traveling with the Army, he became Army. So he switched back and forth. He wasn't a regular Japanese soldier. So he was with the Army on that landing. So we questioned him the best I could in my limited Japanese and found out he might be a pretty important guy for information. So when I found out all I could, and that was about his name and his age and some of his history, and so we decided he might be a good witness for G2. So we sent him back to the G2 headquarters, and he did change. He gave them quite a bit of information. I don't think it made much difference there at Kwajalein, but it came in handy at other places because he was knowledgeable about the whole Pacific. So it helped us when we got to Saipan after the Marshall Islands was over, the operation was over. So we used some of that knowledge at Saipan for our invasion of that island, and that was the end of the Kwajalein thing and the Inuitak. And we were now on Saipan, where Captain Katzenbach got shot 5 times and was evacuated. It didn't kill him, but fortunately it didn't hit any vital organs, so he survived it and later became the defense secretary under President Harry Truman. We gained some knowledge from the guy, and Captain Katzenbach being what he was. And I was Captain Katzenbach's runner on that island. When his successor came in, they passed me along, and I became the runner for the next captain. Through the years, I was a runner for 5 different captains of that company. The last one being Iwo Jima. Captain Key was shot on Iwo Jima and was evacuated, and Lieutenant Barber became the commanding officer of our company at that time, and so they just passed me along to him, and he used me as his runner. So I served 5 different captains in that company as runner, And my main job was to keep those guys alive if I could. And so they tried to prepare me for that. And I only lost one of them. I was able to, they all told me, your job is to keep us alive. Don't worry about yourself, because you take care of us. So I did the best I could. And when I got the Bronze Star on Iwo, when Lieutenant Barber gave me an order to meet the commander of the battalion on our left, because we were at a place called, it was either 362 or 382, and they took that place 6 times, and we were the 6th time. And they ran us into an ambush there and set us up in crossfire between mortars and machine guns. And Lieutenant Barber gave me an order to go to the battalion commander, or the company commander on our left, and tell him to move his company over, and we would try to fill in the distance and close that gap, because they had machine gun fire set up, crossfire, and they were killing a lot of Marines there. Our company was 65% casualties in that particular action. But it worked, as Lieutenant Barber thought it would, and so he was commended, I think, for his action, and I got the Bronze Star because of the assignment he gave me. Let me tell you, I either outran some machine gun bullets, or they were lousy gunners, because they dug the dirt up around my feet for that 500 yards I had to go. And then I had to return to my company under the same circumstances. And we took the corpsmen down into that massacre there, and we wanted to get anybody we thought was alive, we wanted to get them out. They were dead and injured all over the place, so we went from man to man down there that was laying on the ground. And when McGowan would examine them, he would tell us if they were either dead or alive. So we left the dead ones and tried to get the alive ones out. We got a number of those people out, but there were a number of our people left in there that were dead. And an interesting side story was, we had 2 guys in our company that we call Mutt and Jeff, because one of them was tall and the other one, they were inseparable. You never saw one that you didn't see the other. They were good friends. And they both were shot. And McGowan told us they didn't have a chance of getting out of there. He said they just barely here, And so we finally discussed it, and we were talking about it. We got to this guy, and we were talking. We asked McGowan, is this guy alive? If he's alive, we're going to try to get him out. He said, he's so near dead, you don't need to bother. And that was true of both of them. And they were 25 feet apart, those 2 guys. When we went back and took that and get those wounded out, that one guy had crawled that 25 yards over to his buddy and laid his head on the guy's chest, and we found them both dead there. And so it haunted us because they were alive and we left them. But they probably would not have made it, so McGowan probably did the wise thing. I don't know.
Tell me the story of Corporal Verwers.
Verwers, he was a private first class like me. He was shot and went down. And we were kneeling over him, trying to decide whether we'd get him out because he was hit several times. And so finally, McGowan, we're standing over talking whether we're going to get him out of there or not. And we finally just said, McGowan, is this guy alive? And he said, yes, but just barely. And he said, well, if he's alive, we're going to try to get him out of here. We did. We got Verwoerd out of there. He was evacuated. He went to the hospital ship, and they repaired him. 3 months later, he was back in the company, regular duty. Finished Iwo with us and survived Iwo. A little side story to that, after I got back years, on my 90th birthday, I got a call from Washington State, and the guy's name was Verwoerd. He was that guy's son, and he called when Fox News ran a story of my 90th birthday. And when he saw that on Fox News, he called me in Las Vegas to thank me for my part of saving his father those many, many years ago. And it was one of the most gratifying calls I ever got. Verwoerd had just died the year before he called me. When he found out where I was, he called me immediately and told me how he and his brothers appreciated it, but unfortunately his father passed away the year before. So,
well, that's fascinating because not only were you making a huge impact right then and there in the battle, but now you see, whatever it was, 60, 70 years later.
Yeah, as I reflected over the years, I found so many things that amazed me. And I planned to be a 30-year man when I went in, but my sister talked me out of it when I was up for discharge. And she said, you can go back in the Marine Corps after 90 days and get all the benefits you're trying to get now by shipping over. So she talked me into it. And since I was engaged to a gal in California, well, I accepted her. We got married and lived together 67 years. And she unfortunately died in 2012. And I had to say goodbye to her. But we had 67 years together. We had a normal life, and we had 2 wonderful daughters. They're still around. One of them is with me here today. She's here. She takes care of me like a mother. So I have to have her along with me.
Let me back you up a little bit because we kind of jumped into the middle of the Battle of Iwo Jima. So tell me about when you first came ashore and what the resistance was like from the Japanese.
Well, the 3rd Marine Division came in first, and they were at the bottom of Mount Suribachi. We came in the second wave, and we were next to the 3rd Marine Division. And then the 5th Division came in after us and was on our right. So there were big guns up on Mount Suribachi. When we landed there, we were right in their line of fire. So they pinned us down on the beach, and that's where all the confusion came because the boats that we went in on was the garbage that was keeping other troops from coming in. So we had to call for the Seabees, and the Navy pulled those sunken boats that were keeping the reinforcements out, I should say. They pulled the wreckage out to sink them so we could get more boats in there. And then the Seabees had to come in and put ramps because our tanks couldn't traverse in that black sand. And so the Seabees came in and put ramps up where the tanks could go up because they were bogged down. They couldn't climb that steep beach. And once they got the thing cleared out, well, then it became a normal operation again, and they brought in more people because they found out that there was shallow water there, and they could drop them off in the water, and they could wade in. That's how we got in.
Okay, I was going to ask what you're doing this whole time.
I'm laying on the beach trying to stay alive. And during that time, I probably gained 3 feet up that steep thing because it became mud, and you couldn't even climb up there. So I gained about 3 feet, and I was still at the top of that beach when the first B-29 landed on the first airfield. So that was how slow it was. But once we got up that ridge onto that airfield, we went across the airfield to cut off any advance from anybody on the left. And 3rd Marine Division the men of 3rd Marine Division, they went across and went up Suribachi. So we had the island separated. And our 4th Division started to the right, which was north, and 3rd Marine Division went up Suribachi. So we finally got across the airfield and turned, headed north. But they were still fighting on the end of the runway when we got there. So, but the strategy worked, and eventually, and we got battle lines going in both directions, and it became an operation that was halfway sensible. The only thing is, General Smith was kind of wrong when he said it was going to take 72 hours to take the whole island. So the strategy was working, and now it became a more normal operation. But that didn't mean that, most of the Japanese were underground, so they had, and most of them died under there too.
Yeah.
Because we found 2 entrances to those caverns, and we put 500 pounds of C2 at each entrance and blew it up, sealed them off. And that's where we got some knowledge, because after we blew it up and the rocks stopped falling almost, a Japanese climbed up out of one of those entrances that we blew up. He was bleeding at the nose and everything coming up, but was able to communicate with him, and he's the one that told us that how many people were still underground. General Kuribayashi was under there with 20,000 troops. And so many of them died under there. We sent him back in there to tell them we was going to bomb again and come out if they wished. And when he came back out of there, he said that General Kuribayashi said they weren't coming out. They were going to stay there. And so, unfortunately, he died there because he didn't bring his troops out.
They didn't surrender. That was their policy, right?
That was their policy. And you see, he gave each one of his command a command that we're probably going to die here, but it's an honor to die for the emperor, so that doesn't matter. But I want each one of you to make a personal pledge that before you die, you'll kill 10 Marines, at least. And so he made them pledge that. And, of course, they would have tried that if they ever come up out of their things, but not too many people came to the surface. But it still became quite a battle, because on the northern end, we were still losing people. Every time we took a step, we were still losing people until we hit the other end. And finally, for us, it was over then. But they still were dying even after we come back from the front. So it was pretty nasty stuff.
How would you describe the skill of the Japanese fighter? They were obviously dedicated, but...
They are very racist, and they are also dedicated to the emperor. And, of course, they got that belief about those 9 virgins they're going to get when they get to heaven if they die for the country. So they were very tenacious, and I think every one of them meant to carry out that 10 Marines before I die. And they were most pugnacious. But as a fighting unit, you drop their commander and they become totally disorganized. They weren't like us. At times, there was one time we had a company in the 4th Marine Division. There was a private leading the company because the officers had been shot. But the Japanese were like that. If you drop their leader, they become totally disorganized, and they were not a very effective fighting unit once that happened. And so that was a major factor of the people that were on the surface fighting, because they just go to pieces when they don't have a leader. It was a big deal for that operation.
Sir, we're almost out of time, but as you look back now, 75 years since the battle, what does your service and the service of your fellow Marines mean to you that day?
That changed my life completely. My mother was a dear Christian that brought us up in a Christian home, and I thought I was a Christian all during that war, so I didn't fear death at all. But I went through that whole war on my mother's religion, thinking I was okay. But I didn't become a Christian until I was 55 years old, a long time after the war, because I moved to Pomona, California, and I lived next door to a Methodist parsonage there. And there's a young minister from Mississippi named McGee Wilkes, was the second preacher that came there after we moved there in 1954. And we became fast friends. He was from Mississippi and I was from Alabama, so we had that Southern heritage, you know. And we talked a lot and became big friends. And one day I'm talking to McGee, and he says, "Joe, I hate to tell you this, but you're not even a Christian." I said, "Oh, McGee, I've been a Christian all my life." He said, "No, you haven't." He says, "You've been skating along on your mother's religion, and that's no good." I said, "What do I do to become a Christian, McGee?" He said, "Do you want to become a Christian right now?" And I said, "Oh, yes, I do. Just tell me how." He said, "Well, close your eyes and repeat this prayer after me." And he said to me, the prayer, "Accept Jesus." And then when I opened my eyes, the world looked totally different to me. And McGee said, "Now you're a Christian, son." I've tried to be a Christian from then on because it changed my life. I never finished high school that I intended to go back to school and finished it. And when my wife and I got married and we had my oldest daughter, it became apparent to me it's more important for you to put milk on the table for that kid than it is for you to go back to school. And so that's how it is today. And we have 2 wonderful daughters because of it, because of my wife, mainly. I was just a disciplinarian in the family. Because my wife would tell them when they do something that she didn't like, she said, "Wait till your father gets home." And so that became a password. And I taught my daughters this: the best thing you can do to show your love for your father is to love and respect your mother. You better do it because there's consequences if you don't. And so tell you today that was a part of the reason. Matter of fact, if my oldest daughter was in here, she said, "If I hadn't been afraid of you, I'd probably be in Haight-Ashbury today." So
Joe,
that was fine. I love that.
We'll have to call time there. Thank you, sir, very much for your time today.
I appreciate being here. Thank you. And hope to see you around next year.
Joe Rodgers, U.S. Marine Corps veteran, World War II and the Battle of Iwo Jima. I'm Greg Columbus. This is Veterans Chronicles.